Welcome to Film Reel. My name is Jess, and for this video we'll be taking a look at the real truth behind a film that follows one man's vision for his new country, how he inspired a rugby team to do the unimaginable and unite one of the world's most deeply divided nations. Let's talk about Invictus.
What did he say?
I think he wants us to win the World Cup.
Invictus is a 2009 film directed by Clint Eastwood. The film is based on the book Playing the Enemy, written by John Carlin. It tells the story of the events in South Africa leading up to and during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. John Carlin, who interviewed Mandela 3 times to write the book, actually convinced Morgan Freeman to buy the film rights for his book, which was still unfinished at the time. Nelson Mandela had previously stated that he would choose Morgan Freeman to portray him in a film. So, with Mandela's blessing, Freeman convinced Clint Eastwood to direct. The filmmakers spent a week meeting with John Carlin in order to discuss how to transform his book into a screenplay. The next task was finding the perfect cast. First up, we of course have Nelson Mandela, portrayed in the film by Morgan Freeman. Nelson Mandela was the first democratically elected president of South Africa. He recognized the potential of rugby to unite his fledgling nation and tasked the national rugby team's captain with winning the Rugby World Cup. Francois Pienaar was the South African rugby captain from 1993 to 1996. In the film, he's portrayed by Matt Damon. Another notable South African rugby player is Chester Williams, the team's only non-white player. In the film, he's portrayed by McNeil Hendricks, who actually played rugby for South Africa in real life. Invictus was shot on location in Cape Town, South Africa. The film is set in South Africa from 1990 to 1995, a time when the country's politics transformed from the authoritarian apartheid rule to a new democracy. South Africa had previously been under Dutch and then British colonial rule. So since the first European colonists arrived in the country, racial segregation has always been there, but the official system of apartheid was only introduced in 1948, after the political ascendance of the Afrikaner National Party. Afrikaner refers to the people who descended predominantly from Dutch settlers. The National Party shaped a government that favored the white minority of the population by allocating them the highest status within society, followed by Indian people, then colored people who come from a mixed ancestry of African, European, and Asian descendants. And finally, the black majority of the population was allocated the lowest societal status. Under apartheid, people of color were denied equal access to education, jobs, public amenities, and living areas. Black people in particular were moved to segregated townships in conditions of brutal poverty, excluded from any role in national politics, and denied jobs beyond those involving unskilled labor. During this time, South African sports teams, which were comprised of white athletes, were banned from competing in major sporting events because of the country's discriminatory policies. After the collapse of apartheid, South Africa was finally welcomed back onto the global sporting stage. And this is where our story begins. Alright, so now that we have a brief understanding of the context and key players, let's get into our film Invictus. And naturally, spoiler warning. On the 11th of February 1990, Nelson Mandela is released from prison after having spent 27 years in captivity. 4 years later, Mandela is elected the first black president of South Africa. His presidency faces enormous challenges in the post-apartheid era, including rampant poverty and crime, and Mandela is particularly concerned about racial divisions between black and white South Africans, which would lead to violence. I think the opening of the film succeeds in establishing the socio-economic landscape of South Africa in 1990. Not only are the black and white races divided in terms of geographical space, but they were worlds apart in terms of their beliefs and their access to wealth. In the film, we see real archival footage from Mandela's release, interspersed with the dramatized reenactment of it. Mandela had been arrested in 1962 and later imprisoned after he led a sabotage campaign against the apartheid government. Mandela was an outspoken activist and member of the liberation movement known as the African National Congress, or ANC. Following his release, Mandela and the ANC entered negotiations with the apartheid government in order to forge a new path for South Africa. But the years leading up to the country's first democratic election were not peaceful ones. In fact, South Africa was on the brink of a civil war. The film accurately depicts the infighting between black-led organizations, largely fueled by apartheid government-sponsored forces. But Invictus does leave out some of the most destabilizing events that happened during this time, like the massacres in 1992 and the assassination of popular ANC leader Chris Hani in 1993. What the film does portray well is the way Mandela navigated these tragedies, by insisting that peace can be the only path forward. His goal was realized on the 27th of April 1994 when South Africa held its first democratic elections. Like we see in the film, Mandela was voted the president of South Africa and the ANC became the country's new ruling party. The ill will which both white and black groups hold towards each other is seen even in Mandela's own security detail, where relations between the established white officers who had guarded Mandela's predecessors and the black ANC additions to security are frosty and marked by mutual distrust. The action of the film begins with Mandela's first day as the new president. At this point, we're also introduced to Francois Pienaar and his Afrikaans family. We see the anxieties of white South Africans as Francois's father describes how black people will take their jobs and drive them out of the country. This belief is further illustrated by a number of white government workers quitting their jobs before the president's term even begins. But Mandela sought to balance the aspirations of black South Africans and the fears of white ones. We see this clearly demonstrated in the film when Mandela merges a group of black and white bodyguards. This really did happen. Jason Chabalala, a bodyguard that we see depicted in the film, explains how there were fundamental trust issues with working with the same officers who represented everything he feared and hated. According to Chabalala, the black bodyguards even wondered if their white counterparts were planning on harming Mandela. Gert Barnard, a white bodyguard, describes how at first the black officers closely surrounded Mandela, while the white ones stood a few feet away. Mandela noticed the tension between the bodyguards and sat them down and told them how important it was for them to all play their part in building a new nation by working together. While attending a game between the Springboks, the country's rugby union team, and England, Mandela recognizes that some black people in the stadium are cheering for England and not their own country, as the mostly white Springboks represented prejudice and apartheid in their minds. He remarks that he did the same while imprisoned on Robben Island. This rugby match depicted in the film was a test match between England and South Africa played in Pretoria in 1994. Much like we see in the film, the Springboks lose 15-32. It is true that it was common for people of color and opponents to the regime to not support the Springbok team. During his time in prison, Mandela carefully observed his Afrikaner warders in order to understand their way of thinking. He studied Afrikaner history and the Afrikaans language. In doing so, he discovered their almost sacred passion for rugby. The Springbok had been the rugby team's mascot and the sports emblem of the National Party since 1906. The Springbok team's rise to predominance during the late 40s and early 50s also coincided with the imposition of apartheid. In 1953, all public areas in South Africa became officially segregated, including the rugby field. Thus, the game of rugby became linked to a partial and exclusionary nationalism. Knowing that South Africa is set to host the 1995 Rugby World Cup in 1 year's time, Mandela persuades a meeting of the newly black-dominated South African Sports Council to support the Springboks. He then meets with the captain of the Springboks rugby team, Francois Pienaar, and implies that a Springboks victory in the World Cup will unite and inspire the nation. Mandela also shares with Francois a poem, Invictus, that had motivated him during his time in prison. After the first free elections in 1994, all South African sports teams adopted the protea, the country's national flower, as their emblem, all except the rugby team. In the film, Mandela is presented as a lone voice arguing for the ANC to get behind the Springboks as a way of offering peace to white Afrikaners. While it is true that Mandela argued for the retention of the Springboks emblem, he was not the only one to do so. Mandela convinced fellow ANC members, Makankezi Stofile and Steve Tshwete, that keeping the Springbok would be a conciliatory gesture. The two of them would also become key advocates for supporting rugby. But it is true that most of the ANC was widely opposed to the idea. Mandela's meeting with Francois Pienaar is accurately recreated according to the real event that is described in John Carlin's book. In the film, we see the two discussing exceeding expectations when it came to the Rugby World Cup and brokering peace between all races in South Africa. However, Francois Pienaar explains that in reality, Mandela was more interested in hearing about Francois' life and sharing his own experiences than really discussing the World Cup in that first meeting. Francois describes how nervous he was to meet Mandela, but says that the president put him at ease and made him feel safe. It is false that Mandela ever told Francois about the William Henley poem Invictus. Francois says that Mandela never gave him a poem or a book. What he did give was an aura and a feeling that their meeting was bigger than just the two of them. Francois and his teammates train. Many South Africans, both black and white, doubt that rugby will unite a nation torn apart by nearly 50 years of racial tensions. As for many black people, the Springboks symbolize the white minority rule. Both Mandela and Pienaar, however, stand firmly behind their theory that the game can successfully unite the country. In the film, we see Mandela's daughter Zinzi disapprove of her father's support for the Springboks. It is true that Mandela's conciliatory strategy to a harshly racist regime did not sit well with many black South Africans. One of his most vocal critics was his estranged wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. She believed that he was more focused on appeasing white people than creating opportunities for black South Africans. But Mandela and Francois remained steadfast in their belief that rugby could unite the country if everyone could get behind the Springboks. In the PR build-up to the World Cup, the phrase "one team, one country" was launched and became the Springboks slogan during the tournament. In the film, we see the rugby team conduct a coaching clinic in a township. The young boys there are immediately enamored with the team's only non-white player, Chester Williams, running to greet him and cheering his name. This is not factual. In his book, Carling points out the fact that Chester Williams was not entirely convincing to black South Africans, as he was not black himself but was actually coloured. In fact, when the Springboks visited Zwede Township, it was another player, Mark Andrews, who the children were really drawn to, because he was able to speak their language, isiXhosa. Mandela meets with the Springboks to wish them well for their final preparation before the tournament. The 1995 Rugby World Cup kicks off with the Springboks beating the defending champions Australia in their opening match. The Springbok team then visits Robben Island, where Mandela spent the first 18 of his 27 years in jail. There, Pienaar is inspired by Mandela's will and his idea of self-mastery in Invictus. In the film, Mandela visits the team, and we see Springbok player Henny LaRue gift Mandela a cap donning the Springbok emblem. This is true. Apparently, Henny was so impressed by the president's sincere well wishes that he spontaneously took the cap off another player's head and gifted it to the president as a show of appreciation. The opening match of the World Cup was the first opportunity to showcase the dream of a new South Africa being realized. In a massive show of dominance, South Africa managed to beat Australia 27-18. The Australian fly half at the time remarked after the match that, quote, "It felt as if we were playing the whole of South Africa." He continued, quote, "We lost, but it was great to be part of a wonderful occasion." It was now clear that Mandela's plan of one team, one country had started to gain momentum. The Springboks also really did visit Robben Island in 1995. When Francois Pienaar was asked which scene in the film was closest to real life, he said it was this scene, the moment he enters Mandela's cell. Apparently, Francois was so touched by this experience, he broke into tears at the film's Los Angeles premiere. The Springboks continue their World Cup dominance with a win against Western Samoa. Support for the team begins to grow among all South Africans. while Mandela's security team also grows closer as the racially diverse officers come to respect their comrades' professionalism and dedication. As Mandela conducts trade negotiations in Taiwan, the Springboks defy all expectations and defeat France in heavy rain to advance to the final against their arch rivals, New Zealand's All Blacks. It is false that South Africa's next match was against Western Samoa. After Australia, South Africa took another 2 victories against Romania and then Canada. These secured the Springboks a spot in the quarter-final, where they then played and beat Western Samoa 42-14. The film shows a building sense of excitement and support for the Springboks' progress in the World Cup. But this is not entirely accurate. Even during the World Cup, Mandela still had enormous difficulty in selling rugby to many of his own supporters. The day before the semi-finals, Mandela, who was actually not in Taiwan at the time, addressed the crowd at an ANC event wearing his Springbok rugby cap. The president explains how when he told the crowd to embrace the Springbok rugby players as their own, he was booed. But the film is correct in suggesting that Mandela's security team grew closer and more comfortable with each other. To this day, they remain friends and are even on a WhatsApp group of former bodyguards. The day of the rain-soaked semi-final arrives, and as is depicted in the film, South Africa emerges victorious against France with a winning score of 19-15. Supported by a large home crowd of all races at Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg, Pienaar motivates his teammates for the final. A South African Airways Boeing 747 jetliner flies low over the stadium, with the message "Good luck, Bokke," the Springboks' Afrikaans nickname, painted on the undersides of the plane's wings. Mandela famously arrives onto the field before the match wearing a Springboks cap and a replica of Pienaar's number 6 jersey. You would think that the film added the low-flying Boeing 747 for cinematic effect, but it really did happen. A South African pilot plotted the course of the flight well in advance. There were no passengers and only a small crew on board. Like we see in the film, the airplane really did carry the message "Good luck, Bokke," and released vibrations and noise into the stadium, energizing the players and the 63,000-person crowd. Mandela created one of the most iconic images in sports history when he came out to greet the players at the final, wearing the Springbok jersey and cap. The film correctly shows that the mostly white audience was won over by Mandela's gesture and spontaneously started chanting his name. When the South African national anthem plays before the match, Francois is shown passionately singing the new anthem, Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika. This is false. While it is true that the Springbok team learned and sang the new anthem, the team captain did not before the final. The Springboks complete their run by beating the All Blacks 15-12 in extra time. Mandela and Pienaar meet on the field together to celebrate the improbable victory, and Mandela hands Pienaar the Webb Ellis Cup. The Springboks are now world champions. Mandela then drives away in the traffic-jammed streets leaving the stadium. He insists that there is no hurry as he watches South Africans celebrating together in the street. The film accurately shows the points that were scored during the final and the crucial drop goal kicked by Joel Stransky in the final minutes of extra time. Invictus also perfectly recreates the moments after the final whistle, like Chester Williams leading the team in prayer and Francois proclaiming that there were not 63,000 South Africans supporting the team from the stadium, but the country's entire population of 43 million South Africans supported the team. And of course, we are presented with the image of Nelson Mandela and Francois Pienaar thanking each other for their contributions to the nation. Mandela hands Francois the trophy as his dream of a new South Africa is realized. Racism is over and South Africans' problems are forever fixed. Let's get into it. Obviously, this is a South African story being told by American filmmakers. One thing I recognized as being noticeably impacted by this was the actual rugby that we see in the film. As of 2021, the Men's Rugby World Cup is the third most popular sporting event in the world. While rugby is fast growing in the US, only 14% of American sports fans said they were familiar with the Rugby World Cup. And based on the rugby scenes in the film, it seems like Clint Eastwood was only vaguely familiar with the sport. We're presented with shots of players crashing into each other, followed by reaction shots to give some kind of meaning to the action. There is no real narrative constructed in the rugby scenes. We have no sense of which team has momentum or which plays are important. In a film where rugby is so integral to the plot, it seems like Invictus doesn't actually care about the rugby it's depicting. These scenes could have been used to further the film's themes and tensions. In real life, the World Cup final was thrilling, but in the film, the game is just boring. The other aspect of the film that I think suffers from having American filmmakers is the depiction of South African society. South Africa is a multi-ethnic society encompassing a wide variety of cultures and religions. This is evident in the fact that there are 12 official languages. In the film, we hear Mandela describe South Africa as the Rainbow Nation. This really was a phrase that was coined and frequently used during the early years of democracy. It encapsulates this diverse nation with people of all colors from all backgrounds, rich and poor, all religions, and many different languages. While the film does have an awareness of the diversity of South African society, it largely reduces it to the rigid dichotomy of black or white. We see this especially with Chester Williams's portrayal. As a colored man, he was obviously not white, but Invictus makes no attempt to depict his actual racial classification or status. And as he is a non-white person, he is simply presented as black in the film. In an interview, Matt Damon himself described how the feelings of South Africans, quote, could only truly be expressed by someone who's from there. He elaborated saying, quote, as an American going there, to grasp the nuance of that culture is probably impossible. While I believe the film struggles with these aspects, the one area I think it really succeeds is the depiction of Mandela's character and his actions. In the film, we see Mandela's charisma on full display. He has a great sense of humor, takes an interest in the people around him, and can even be flirty at times. In reality, there are many anecdotes from Francois Pienaar, the Springboks players, and Mandela's own bodyguards that all confirm how involved Mandela was on a personal level. He made an effort to learn people's names, learn about their families, their interests, in order to genuinely connect with them. Through his charming and caring nature, Mandela was able to enlist these unlikely candidates in order to serve his goal of a new South Africa. But Mandela recognized that nation building required more than a new anthem or constitution or flag. There needed to be a collective moment of national pride. In a skillful act of statecraft conducted right in the international spotlight, Mandela orchestrated a show of unity in one of the world's most bitterly divided nations. So, what is the legacy of this today? Well, in both economic and sporting terms, the 1995 Rugby World Cup victory created an incredible opportunity for transformation in the country. An opportunity that was largely not taken. According to a 2018 report from the World Bank, South Africa is the most economically unequal country in the world, with the gap between rich and poor only widening. Despite economic policies that have attempted to distribute the country's resources, the white minority of the population is more likely to enjoy a privileged lifestyle, while people of color, especially the black majority of the population, remain confined to the lower rungs of the socio-economic ladder. But what about rugby in South Africa? The inclusion of one non-white player in the 1995 Springbok team was hardly groundbreaking, but it was a sign of South Africa's huge potential. However, the integration of players of color crawled along rather than accelerated following the victory. When the Springboks would win their next Rugby World Cup in 2007, there were only 6 players of color included in the 32-man squad. The overwhelmingly white composition of the team pointed to the enduring inequalities in post-apartheid South Africa. But then, a new hope would arise. In 2019, the Springboks would take their third World Cup victory under the leadership of South Africa's first black captain, Siya Kolisi. Don't get it twisted. Transformation within South African rugby is still slow moving. Of the 33 Springboks that played in the tournament, only 12 were people of colour. But Siya Kolisi represented a change within South African rugby. Kolisi did not have a privileged upbringing. He was born to teenage parents and grew up in Zwide Township. It was only through his skill and talent that he was scouted and offered a rugby scholarship at one of the top sporting schools in the country. Kolisi has grabbed the opportunities that were previously withheld from black rugby players. To many, he personifies the dream of a new South Africa. Harkening back to previous mantras like one team, one country, the 2019 Springbok team launched the campaign #StrongerTogether. After the final match, Kolisi remarked, quote, "We have so many problems in our country, but to have a team like this, where we come from different backgrounds, different races, and we came together for one goal. I have never seen South Africa like this. We were playing for the people back home. We can achieve anything if we work together as one." While the legacy of South Africa's 1995 World Cup victory is no doubt complicated, that moment symbolized what the nation could achieve by setting aside differences and working together. Mandela once said, quote, "Sport has the power to change the world. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair." He recognized the opportunity for the South African rugby team to unite the country. Decades later, the Springboks continue to bring hope and pride to South African people. While Invictus falls short in depicting the intricacies of rugby as a sport and the nuances of South African society, it triumphs in showcasing the significance of Mandela's work to use sport to foster a unified country. This has once again been Film Reel, taking a look at the real truth behind films that are based on true stories. I have included a list of references in the description of this video for you to check out. If you like this video, please like this video. If you want to see more, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye!